Well, I'd like to welcome everyone to this really fun study on Joshua. There's going to be 3 parts, and we're going to be looking at Joshua's first observance of Wavesheaf in the land of Canaan. I just hope that you enjoy it because this is a controversial topic. The placement of Wavesheaf or firstfruits, as some people call it, but just sit back and enjoy it. Well, the teaching is approximately around 1450, 51 BC, just after Moses died. And in this first part, we're going to be looking at Joshua chapters 1 to 5. And you know about the spies and Rahab, and then going through the Jordan River in order to cross over into the land of Canaan. And we're just really excited to find out what is going to happen next. Yes, Joshua enters Canaan, and Covenant Calendar Club has done this study before. I would just like you to note that this is a revision from several studies, but it was first given in 2018. And there are some interesting things to watch for in this study. There's going to be 3 very interesting patterns for counting to 3. That's going to be important for some other studies. There will be some comparisons, very general, simple comparisons between what Joshua is saying, and I'm going to say the popular Enoch Zadok calendar count. What does Enoch Zadok say for the placement of Passover and the Wavesheaf festival? Now, there's lots of variations between Enoch and Zadok and Essene calendars, but we're just going to take the most popular view and just use the generic term of Enoch. So when you see Enoch and Zadok, you'll see some of those slides as well. We will also have a comparison about what Joshua is doing in comparison to what some of the lunar Sabbath reckoning happens out there, just very slight. And also we will have solid confirmation on the statute placement for Wavesheaf. There is not going to be any question whatsoever, hopefully, by the time we get done. Well, some might be saying a restoration of Yahuwah's calendar? Like, isn't it restored already? Well, you know, for those that wish to follow in Yahuwah and his footsteps, and they want to respond in worship and adoration, honoring the sabbatical worship statutes and festivals is really important to them. However, we all know that the enemy is very clever, and he has managed to get many of Yahuwah's sincere followers sidetracked when it comes to honoring Yahuwah's appointed times. And many of them give homage to man's pagan traditions and counterfeit festival calendars that have replaced many and sometimes all of the divine appointments. So restoration of Yahuwah's divine calendar, it's a huge task, and it's been in the search engines for quite a long time. It's not quite done yet. But the good news is that there are a few who believe Yahuwah's perfect divine calendar has been restored through a careful search of the scriptures, at least to this point in time. And there's even better news than this. This is what it is. Yahuwah's divine calendar is simple, easy, logical, and I'm going to say elegant. Yes, elegant and pleasing. Everyone that sees it really is pretty happy with it. Well, we talked about restoration of the calendar. What about restoration of Yahuwah's Wavesheaf? Let's just zero in on that. And there are some things to consider about this restoration. Even though the weekly Sabbath has been restored to commence at dawn rather than sunset, midnight, or sunrise. And there are some things to consider about restoration, even though the commencement of the new month has been restored by just counting to 30 after the Tekufa, the equinox on the next day, just counting 1 to 30, instead of searching out for the barley ripeness and the lunar phases, whatever they might be. And there are some things to consider about restoration, even though the commencement of the new year has been restored by waiting for that spring Tekufa to usher out the old year through observation of that shadow sign and to begin the new year the next day instead of waiting for a confirmation of a specific moon phase or looking for the barley ripeness or who knows what. Even after all of those things, there can still be confusion over the placement of the Wavesheaf festival, which ultimately affects the placement of Shavuot and Pentecost 50 days later. Yeah, the question is, Wavesheaf needs to have a restoration? Is there really confusion over the placement of Wavesheaf? Could that be so? Some may say, well, you know what? It doesn't really matter because Wavesheaf isn't that important anyway. In fact, my feast camp never pays too much attention to the Wavesheaf festival, so it can't be that crucial. Nobody ever says anything about it. Well, friend, if there is any question about the placement of Wavesheaf and Pentecost, the best thing to do is to check it out with scripture. And Joshua is going to walk us through the proper placement of Wavesheaf through the wonderful encounter that Israel experienced when they finally entered the land of Canaan. And that was after 40 years of wandering in the wilderness. And by the way, sometimes Wavesheaf is known as firstfruits to some people during the Passover festival. Well, we have some options to look at. In this study, we're going to examine two main ways that the Wavesheaf festival is celebrated. And I shouldn't say what you're going to do for the celebration. We're talking about the date. No matter what day Wavesheaf is celebrated on, the 50-day Omer count establishes the placement of Shavuot on the same day of the week as Wavesheaf. They are both affected equally. So this study is going to offer these two options. Option number one, where the Wavesheaf follows the first unleavened bread Sabbath, and that would be Abib 16. Option number two, where Wavesheaf follows the 7676 Shabbat within the Passover festival, or neither. Maybe we're going to find out something about that. Well, there are several testimonies for the proper placement of Wavesheaf in the scriptures. And you know what? For a long time, it seemed that Leviticus 23 and Numbers 15 were the only witnesses to find out the proper placement of Wavesheaf. But there are now 3 more strong additional witnesses from scripture. Plus, we also have the secular historical account to help us to understand this divine placement of Wavesheaf. So the first one we've already mentioned is Leviticus 23 and in Numbers 15. Just about everybody knows about that. The second witness is this story, the testimonies found in Exodus chapters 12 to 16 and then to 19. Actually, those 3 chapters specifically, that is another witness. We are also going to look at Joshua chapters 3 to 5. That is a very strong witness. That's witness number 3. Witness number 4 is the gospel account. And this is going to include the midst of the week crucifixion. It will include the Sabbath resurrection, and it will also include the first day ascension. That's a very strong witness. And then number 5, there is secular history around Rashbi and a quote from Julian Morgenstern that are going to be really interesting. So this complete study today is going to cover only 3 of the 5, not all 5. Number 1, we're going to do in the first part, Leviticus and Numbers. We're going to look at those scriptures. In part number 2, it'll be something about Joshua. And then part number 3, we're going to look at history. Now, what's interesting about Joshua, this first part here, he's going to include 3 sets of counting patterns for 1, 2, and 3, learning to count to 3. And please don't be offended because it is really important to know how to count to 3 and where to start and where to end. And we're going to have a lot of charts and we're going to follow in the footsteps of Joshua. So like I said, we're going to tell you right up front that Joshua's study proves these things. Number 1, that Passover and the weekly Sabbath are on Abib 14. This is in the testimony of Joshua. Number 2, the study is going to prove that the unleavened bread Sabbath is on Abib 15. And number 3, it is going to prove that the wave sheaf is placed on Abib 15, not Abib 16. So the question is, are you ready? Because we are ready to begin. We will be proving these things, but while we get started here, there will be a lot of assumptions until we bring it all together. And Tim is going to teach the sunshine slides.
So in the scripture, we see no observance of wave sheaf as recorded in the wilderness. We don't see that. Because of Israel's sin with a golden calf, a whole new set of laws for the Aaronic priesthood, sanctuary services, and sacrificial laws were commanded upon the people. But we do not see these rehearsals for the wave sheaf in the 40 years of the wilderness. Nothing written about that. Shortly after the sanctuary was raised up, Israel sinned again by refusing to enter Canaan based upon the evil report of the 10 spies. Yet we do know that there was 2 that brought in a good report on that one. On the first observance of spring feasts, that would be in Canaan. And we're going to look at Joshua. He was preparing to take the lead. And the note here is, this study is based on the day beginning with dawn, not sunset. The importance of that is like oxygen. Joshua will show the exact day of the week for the observance of the Passover, that being on Abib 14, and it is on the 7th day Sabbath. Please note that. We have heard so many times that you cannot have a feast day on the 7th day Sabbath. Well, let's look at the witness of Joshua as written in our scripture. And number 2, we're going to see the wave sheaf on Abib 15. Now, the fact of this being on Abib 15, according to Joshua, is going to eliminate some very popular calendars. Number 3, the first day of unleavened bread will be on Abib 15. This information is necessary to understand the following charts, and we're going to be ready to count 1, 2, 3. And yes, I had to learn to count 1, 2, 3 because I did not know how.
We're going to start off, we're going to look in Joshua chapters 1 to 5. And in chapter 1, he was preparing the people. In the first 9 verses, just a little summary, Joshua's book begins with a divine commission to go in and take the land of Canaan. And that promise is given in verse 3, that wherever the soles of their sandals would tread, the land was going to be reserved for Israel. In verses 10 to 22, Joshua gives commands to the officers for taking the land. He tells them what they need to do. But Joshua 1:11 is the important verse for this chapter. It says, "Pass through the camp and command the people, saying, prepare provisions for yourselves, for within 3 days you will cross over this Jordan to go in to possess the land, which Yahuwah your Elohim is giving to you to possess." So we're going to have these charts here, and just get yourself oriented with it, because Joshua said within 3 days. Now, I'm going to give you a clue. We're going to start with the 6th cycle. That would be the preparation day. And it is also, we're going to just make this wonderful assumption that this is the 6th day of the month. So box number 1 is telling us that Joshua said we're going to cross over the Jordan in 3 days. So I want you to note that the 3 days do not include Abib 6. He's saying we are going to do this. So we've just marked out these 3 days. And remember, they all start at dawn, twilight, first break of day. So your first day is going to begin with day 7. You see that day 1, and then day 2, and day 3. So we're just learning to count these days out. And what did Joshua say? He said, after the 3rd day, Israel will cross the Jordan. This is chart number 1 of 7. And if you all remember, the manna is still being provided to the people so that they have something to eat. So this is your first set of learning to count to 3 in Joshua. Now, the next question is, will the calendar events stem or begin with Abib 6, or do they begin with number 7? We're going to have some review slides, once in a while here, and I'll just start the first one off, and Tim will be doing many of them after this. The number one review is this. Joshua is going to confirm that Abib 14 is the weekly Shabbat. Now, in order for that to happen, for the 14th to be on a Shabbat, then that means by default that your first day of the month is going to be on the first cycle or a Sunday in that year when Israel enters the land. Abib 10, you all know about Abib 10, very special day and date. They were choosing the lamb on that day. But even though we have set this out right now, I just want you to know that this is all an assumption until we completely prove it in the scriptures. Joshua's calendar year does not follow the Enoch calendar requirements. Just a little bit of review here. For the Joshua calendar, you remember I said it would have to start on the first cycle of the week in order to have Shabbat on the 14th day of the first month. And we're not going to go into a lot of details about Enoch. Those are in other studies of Joshua's sickle. But I do want to share just some things for you to think about. The Enoch calendar claims, the ones that are most popular, that Abib 1 is always on the fourth cycle of the week or a Wednesday. There's many calendars that claim that the first day of the new year always has to start on the fourth cycle. Only in the Enoch months of 3, the third month, the 6th, the 9th, and the 12th, will there be a 14th day of the month aligning with the 7th day Sabbath of the week. So I've just chosen a slide here. Now, this is from a slide from Zadok calendar in the Dead Sea Scrolls. And Enoch, Zadok, sometimes they're interchangeable terms here, but this is how they show you how they date their Sabbaths. They say 52 Sabbaths a year, and there's repeating patterns. And we want to look for a Sabbath that exists on the 14th cycle of the first or second month on this Enoch calendar. Well, right here, let's look in month 1. There's month 1. And they're saying that the Sabbaths fall on the 4th, the 11th, the 18th, and the 25th. So there's no Sabbath there in the first month that falls on the 14th day of the month. Let's look at month number 2. Well, in month number 2, the Sabbaths land on the 2nd, the 9th, the 16th, the 23rd, and the 30th. So there's no 14th Sabbath, no Sabbath that lands on the 14th day, even in month 2. No weekly Sabbath exists on the 14th cycle in either the first or the second calendar months. But did you take a little peek at month number 3? Look what happens. You do have a Shabbat there on the 14th day of the month, and in month 6, month 9, and month 12 as well. I want you to remember that as we go through some of these slides. Okay, that's just a little bit for Joshua 1. We're going to go into Joshua 2, and this is the chapter on Rahab and the spies. And we'll be looking at chart number 2 out of 7. Now, this is the chapter that has the spies receiving instructions from Joshua to hide. No, not from Joshua, that's from Rahab. She's giving instructions for 3 days of hiding in the mountains. So don't forget, box number 2 here, Joshua is sending out 2 spies. He sent out these spies on Abib 6, a Friday. And you know what? I think that Joshua fully expected those spies to complete their assignment on the day season of that preparation day of Friday and be back to camp before Shabbat. However, the plans were delayed due to suspicions from the residents of Jericho. So along comes Rahab. I'm sure you know the story. She figures it out and she hides the spies. She hides them here towards the evening, the Arab. And what else happens? Well, if you've read some of your scriptures, you'll know that Jericho closes their gates when it gets dark. Rahab declares, when they came searching for the spies, she declares that the spies left when? Before the gates were closed. She had them hiding. In box number 5, we find that Rahab did not send them away until it was dark for sure, because she said that the gates were closing, okay, at dark. So the 3 days for the spies commenced from the time that they fled to the mountains, not from dawn. So I guess she got them out just before those gates got closed up for the whole night. Next, we're going to start our counting. We've got our first set of counting of 3 at the top. This was the 3 days that Joshua talked about before they would cross the Jordan River. Now we have another set of 3. Rahab has told the spies, run for the mountains, hide there for 3 days. She said, for 3 days you need to hide. So if you count the 3 days out, we have to start where she let them go. So we're actually going to start here on the night of Abib 6. So 24 hours will take you here to the night of Abib 7. Then your second day. So when are they actually going to get back into camp? It will be the night of Abib 9. Can you see that? That would be 72 hours. So the spies are hiding for 72 hours in the mountain. That is going to be your second set of counting to 3. You don't have to wait to start your set of counting to 3 till the morning. Your sets start whenever they start, when she let them go. That's where the count begins. That's really an important concept to remember. So now in chapter 3, Tim is going to take us through a little bit on preparing to cross the Jordan. And we've got the chart there at the bottom so you can follow along.
Just a comment with these charts. These charts aren't like you throw some popcorn in the air and they land on the table and we said that works. These charts have been a result of many, many, many charts that have been thrown away prior to these ones. There's been a lot of work gone in to figure out these charts and how they work with the scripture. Just a comment. The spies return. That would be on Abib 9 on the evening. Joshua 3 verse 2. And it came to be after 3 days that the officers went into the midst of the camp. It was a busy Abib 9 night. Joshua 3 verse 3. And they commanded the people, saying, when you see the ark of the covenant of Yahuwah your Elohim, and the priests, the Levites, bearing it, then you shall set out from your place and follow it. They were to be crossing over. Early on Abib 10, this is morning, the Boker hours. Joshua 3:1. And Joshua rose early in the morning. That would be dawn. And Joshua rose early in the morning, and they set out from Shittim and came to the Jordan, he and all the children of Israel, and stayed there before they passed over.
So our next chart is going to pick up from Monday, Abib 9. Okay, so we have these 3 days here where Joshua was telling them 3 days, we're going to cross the Jordan. And as you can see, Rahab had given 3 days of instructions here to hide in the mountains, to get back into camp just on time. Just barely on time, actually 12 hours. Okay, so let's take a little closer look. Now we're getting into Joshua chapter 3, chart number 3 of 7, and this happens to be a very memorable day. We're just picking up from our last chart that we had on the last slide. This is the 3rd day before crossing the Jordan. So let's see what happens. Don't forget that we have to also remember we have our 3rd day here of the spies coming back. They're returning after 3 days. They left in the just before the darkness of the night there, and the gates were closed, so they're coming back 3 days later. In box number 8 here, we find that when the spies got back, that officers gave commands for the Ark of the Covenant was supposed to be done with that. And in box number 9, People were to sanctify themselves, for Joshua said tomorrow. Tomorrow, what is tomorrow? It's going to be Abib 10, very interesting day. He said tomorrow that there was going to be wonders. Yes, tomorrow was going to be the day that they were actually going to cross over. Okay, they're going to cross over from the wilderness into the land of Canaan. Box number 10 tells us that Joshua rose early in the morning. That would be early on the 10th day. And I would say right there, right as the dawn was breaking, he rose and he was getting ready to set out. And of course, the priests got ready to take up the Ark of the Covenant and cross over before the people. They were the ones that went first. In box number 12, excuse me, Yahuwah said to Joshua, this day, which day is it? It's Abib 10. This day I will begin to exalt you in the sight of all of Israel. So it was going to be a very memorial day. And box 13, I just want to give you a little bit of a clue here of what was going on. There was about 40,000 that crossed over the Jordan on the 10th day of the first month, a very memorable day on that 10th day. Okay, Joshua chapter 4 is going to tell us about the Jordan memorial stones.
Charlene, can I get you to back up the slide? One slide, please. I'd like to make a comment here on them crossing over. We need to look at Abib 10, where that blue arrow is, and we need to understand that it was on the 10th day of the month that the lamb was to be chosen. So the question I have for you, by Yahuwah opening up the waters of the Jordan for them to cross over, could that be considered as choosing the lamb, the firstborn, the firstborn, his choosing of the Hebrew nation? Is it possible that's what that represents, the choosing on the 10th? Just a question I want to think about. I consider, consider that as the choosing the lamb, or one of the types. So let's go on to Joshua 4 here, Jordan memorial stones. When all of the people had completely crossed over the Jordan, the next divine command to Joshua was to select 12 men to represent every tribe. They were to bring memorial stones back from the riverbed of the Jordan to erect as an altar for a permanent sign of the crossing of the Jordan on the 10th day of the first month. Joshua 5. This is an interesting concept of this story. The men were circumcised here. Joshua 5, 2-3 and 8-9. At that time, Yahuwah said to Joshua, make these sharp knives and circumcise again the children of Israel the second time. And Joshua made him sharp knives and circumcised the children of Israel at the hill of the foreskins. Verse 8. And it came to pass, when they had done circumcising all the people, that they abode in their places in the camp till they were whole. And Yahuwah said unto Joshua, this day I have rolled away the reproach of Egypt from off you. Wherefore the name of this place is called Gilgal unto this day. So at this point, the scriptures bring us up to the events onto Abib 13. That is very close to the Passover. And there's your 1, 2, 3 day count up to this point.
Yes, this is in Joshua chapter 5, verses 2-9, where the men are circumcised. And so we'll look at chart number 4 out of 7. And we're just saying that this event is going to reach to the day before Passover. And we all know that's on the 14th day of the month. So we know that the Jordan was crossed on the 10th day of the month right now. That is an assumption still, but that's what we're finding. So let's just see if we can prove it true. First point, all the men were circumcised before the Passover and leaving Egypt. That was 40 years before. And you might know that there was no circumcision done in the wilderness. So that meant before they crossed over, that the rest must be circumcised before celebrating Passover in Canaan. So this would have been done on the next day. It would have been Abib 11, where this would have been done. In box 14, I just have a note here that flint knives were made to circumcise the sons of Israel. And going on to box 15, after circumcising, the men stayed in their camp places till they were healed. Now there's a question here. How long would it be till they were healed? Looking at box number 16, we can go back to the story in Genesis 34. It might have some clues for the healing process. And you might remember that this is the story of Simeon and Levi about their sister, Dinah, and Hamor and the slaying of the Shechemites when they violated Dinah. Simeon and Levi were not too happy. In verse 24 and 25, it says this: every male was circumcised who went out of the gate. And in verse 25, on the third day, it says when they were in pain. And of course, I think you might remember that Simeon and Levi made sure that they weren't living another day longer. But anyway, that's what the story says. So it does tell us that on the third day that they were in pain. But let's take a little look at box 17. Following this pattern in Genesis 34, it can be expected that the man will need at least 3 days of healing, hampering any desire to harvest old or new grain of the land. Just imagine, they've been in the wilderness for 40 years. They were eating manna. I don't know if there was any grain there for them to eat, but you can imagine coming into Canaan, if they saw fresh grain, they might have just kind of hungered for that. But on the fourth day, they should be feeling much better in time for Passover on Abib 15 the next day. So Tim, do you have anything to say about those 3 days and their healing process before we go to the next chart?
Yes, I think it was a miracle, basically a miracle that they were healed so quickly. I also believe it's a very interesting fact that Yahuwah planned the timing of the circumcision. How hungry would those people have been for grain? How much resistance would there be for the men to go out and harvest that grain? They were in pain. I think that pain, albeit pain, I believe it was put there on purpose so that the men would not be tempted to eat the grain, of which they were not permitted to eat until a very specific time. I want you to remember this point because it becomes very vital to understanding calendar. No, they were not going to be harvesting grain, but they were healed very quickly at the appropriate time.
Yes, and so this is going to complete our third set of counting to 3. The circumcision was on Abib 11. So there's your first day, and then Abib 12 is your second day, and Abib 13 is the third day that takes you right up to the dawn of Passover. Very interesting timing, a third set of counting to 3. So Tim, will you give us a review of what we've learned so far?
This is what Joshua is going to confirm for us. Abib 11 was the 4th cycle of the week. If you look down in the chart, you'll see in the red, Abib 11. Note that day. It's the midst of the week. And this is when the circumcising began. They had just crossed the Jordan. What is it about that Abib 11 that is so important? Well, that is another way to look back onto the first day of the year, which defines it as Abib 1 being on the first cycle of the week. What does this factor do with the Enoch calendar? It's a decision. Are we going to give our allegiance to a calendar that cannot align with the documentation in the scripture? Or are we going to look at the scripture as the top authority? So it brings us to a decision. Joshua does not agree with Enoch's reckoning. So as we continue through this and we see the proofs of these charts, it will bring you to a decision.
Yes, there's going to be a whole lot more. So this first Passover is now going to be celebrated in Canaan. We've marked Gilgal on the map there so you can have an idea of where they were. You can see there's the Jordan River where they crossed over, and they're getting ready to go to Jericho. In Joshua 5:10, it says, "And the children of Israel encamped in Gilgal, and they kept the Passover on the 14th day of the month at even in the plains of Jericho." Now remember, we are still assuming that Passover is going to be on Shabbat Abib 14, but it will be exposed solidly later in the study. Here's a question, though, that we should think about. Can the Passover and the weekly Sabbath share the same day without scriptural conflict? And I do want you to remember that there is no manna sent on the Shabbat. Okay, that you also need to remember. But what about this Passover being on a seventh day Shabbat? Can it really occur on the weekly Shabbat? Should Passover ever be celebrated on the weekly Shabbat? Or should the festal calendar be adjusted so Passover never falls on the weekly Shabbat? You know, those are important questions. And below, we're going to show you two calendars. One is from 2015 and one is from 2016. And the first one is a lunisolar calendar. And the second one is the covenant calendar in 2016. Both of them are going to demonstrate that the yearly Passover can fall on a weekly Sabbath. Now, I bet you're wondering about a Jewish calendar as well. Well, that's okay. Just keep that question in the back of your mind. But this is a feast camp that follows the lunar cycles and the sunset day. And you can see that they have Passover in this red pink color on a Shabbat. And then the very next day would be their unleavened bread, Sabbath, right? And it's also going to be what they call first fruits day. Okay, so that's from a ministry that follows the lunar cycles and the sunset day. In 2016, the covenant feast calendar, the way it worked out is that the Passover was on the 2nd of April on a Shabbat. And the very next day was also the first Shabbat of unleavened bread. And it was also the Wavesheaf or the first fruits. So that's just an example of two calendars that are calculate quite differently because covenant calendar doesn't use the moon month. We're ready for a review.
Joshua will be celebrating Abib 14 Passover on the weekly Shabbat. Yes, you heard right. Passover on the weekly Shabbat, documented in Scripture. So it's going to be up to you to understand whether we have documented this correctly or not. There is no need to adjust the date. Number 3A, many Jewish calendars are adjusted to avoid the celebration of certain feasts on the weekly Shabbat. We remember Yahusha's words in John 7, verse 6, I believe, where he's talking to his brothers when he said, "Your time is always ready." That word in the Greek references the definition of adjustable. Your feast times, your set apart appointments by the lunar calendar are adjustable. That's what he said. Yet we know in Scripture, Yahuwah says that with him, there is no variableness. Just a point that we need to understand. Passover and the Day of Atonement are two of the feasts that they declare are not to be on a seventh day Shabbat. What does the Scripture say?
Yes, and they say because it's work. Well, when Yah commands it, is it work? Because Yah commanded the priests at the sanctuary to bake their bread, the bread that was in the holy place at the sanctuary. The showbread was baked on Sabbath. Anyway, does a Sabbath Passover demand servile work? You know, some feel that if Abib 14 Passover falls on the weekly Sabbath, then Passover should be moved to Abib 15 so that the commands of both the seventh-day Sabbath and Passover can be honored without any conflict. And even today, some of the Jews' calculations for the Jewish festivals are very arbitrary, and they are set by men. They are not set by scripture, regulations, or instructions. Their annual festivals can be off as much as 2 days from the original day ordained by their Jewish calendar commands, especially if the annual feasts occur on or even close to the weekly Sabbath. But there is no scriptural command that we can find that would exempt Passover from falling on the weekly Sabbath. And that's one of the reasons why the Joshua study is so important. As it has been noted, the preparations for Passover can be done on the preparation day, and the extra Passover sacrifice was not a Sabbath violation according to the scriptures anyway. So the answer is no. Passover does not need to be moved if it comes close to a Shabbat or lands on the same day as Shabbat.
And just a quick comment about what kind of work can be done on the Sabbath. When you follow through with the absolutely incredibly precise documentation of the Exodus from Mitzrayim to the 50th day of Pentecost on Mount Sinai, when you see the documentation in there and you follow that through until the first day of the second year in the wilderness, when the temple of Yahuwah, or the tabernacle, was commanded by Yahuwah to be raised, that tabernacle was raised on a seventh-day Sabbath. When I first saw that, I was absolutely shocked. I had a difficult time understanding that, and I had to go over the charts time and time and time again when I realized that when Yahuwah commands us to do righteousness, it doesn't matter if it's physical work or not. If it's his word doing his work, then it's acceptable. That being said, let's look at the unleavened bread for the first Passover in Canaan. Even though Israel was in the land of Canaan with grain all around them, the scriptural command was firm. Israel was not allowed to touch any of the old or the new grain for their unleavened bread at the Passover meal on Abib 14. I'm going to read this again because this is paramount in importance. The scriptural command was firm. Israel was not allowed to touch any of the old or the new grain. How many classifications fall outside of old or new grain? None. They were not to touch, not to consume any of the grain, period, until a certain point. And we're going to be looking at that very specifically coming up. And at this point, we are still assuming for this study that the Passover is on the seventh-day Sabbath. The first partaking of unleavened bread from grain became part of the festival on Abib 15. When? After the Wavesheaf ceremony was completed. Allow me to say that again. The first partaking of the unleavened bread from grain, remember, they had been restricted that they could not eat it, but there was a point where they were allowed to. So I'll start this again. The first partaking of unleavened bread from grain became part of the festival on Abib 15. When? After the Wavesheaf ceremony was completed. This is important. This point there is what eliminates many false calendars. So let's place the first Sabbath of unleavened bread, Abib 15, on a chart.
Okay, so this is going to be chart number 5 of 7. And most of us know that Passover is on the 14th day of the month, and the first Shabbat of unleavened bread is on the 15th day of the month. In Joshua 5:10, it talks about Passover. In Joshua 5, verse 11, it talks about unleavened bread Shabbat there. Now, don't forget, we are wanting to figure out what's going on here. So we're just going to add in the 15th day of the month, It naturally falls right after the 14th. We know that that's always the unleavened bread Sabbath. The children kept the Passover on the 14th day of the month at even in the plains of Jericho. And you might also remember that the original Passover command said this in Exodus 12, verses 8 and 10. They shall eat the flesh when? On that night. Any of it that is left until the morning, you shall burn with fire. You shall not leave any of it until the morning. And anything that is left until the morning, you shall burn with fire. I think it says it there 2 times so that there's no mistaking. Well, what happens at the morning, at the dawn? That's the exchange cycle right there to take you into Abib 15. In box 20, we are just going to note that Abib 15, once again, is the first unleavened bread Sabbath. Right here at dawn, that's where Abib 15 begins for your full 24 hours. In Leviticus 23:6, it says that Abib, and on the 15th day of the same month is the feast of the unleavened bread unto Yahuwah. I just want you to remember, though, that we are still assuming that Passover is on a Shabbat. Tim, how about a review?
Passover the 14th, Wavesheaf the 15th. Joshua 5:11. When did they eat the corn? Let's read it. And they did eat of the old corn. Remember, they were restricted from eating it. But here it says, and they did eat of the old corn. When? They ate it of the land on the morrow after the Passover. Highly specific timing. They ate the corn after the Passover. They ate unleavened cakes and parched corn in the self-same day. Those words, self-same day, we are going to be looking at that in detail in part 2. The importance of those words cannot be expressed properly. So let's look at the Hebrew definition for morrow. That word is H4283. It is mocharoth. Its definition there is the morrow, tomorrow, and the day after. So that tells us that there has been a division at some point. We understand that division as the dawn. None of these definitions are timed anywhere near sunset. Passover, again, the 14th, and Wavesheaf on the 15th. Joshua 5:11 is specific. The grain is eaten on the morrow after the Passover. That means that the dawn had came and the Passover was finished and the unleavened bread first Shabbat had begun. They ate the grain on the day after the Passover. Note, the tomorrow begins with the boker, that is the morning twilight mixture, which we understand as dawn. The Wavesheaf festival also begins at boker twilight. Finally, after the Wavesheaf ceremony, I hope you read those words with me. After the Wavesheaf ceremony, that is by statute, and you're going to see this coming up. After the Wavesheaf ceremony, Yisrael was allowed to take of the old or the new grain to make unleavened bread, according to the statute. The Wavesheaf is established on Abib 14. We are still assuming a Passover is on the 7th day Sabbath. Joshua has confirmed that the Wavesheaf occurred on Abib 15, the morrow after the Passover. No, it's not on Abib 16, the morrow after the first unleavened bread Sabbath. Why is that statement there? Because we have heard so many times that the Wavesheaf must be on Abib 16. Well, we're going to be looking at that very closely, not in this study, but in the next studies coming. So here we see on the 10th of the week was the crossing over Then on the 11th was a very special day. That was when they began to be circumcised. There was 3 days coming up to the Passover. That Passover was on the 7th day Sabbath. That is Abib 14, Passover. The next day, after the Passover, remember, after the Passover, this is the 15th, that is on the tomorrow, that is the Wavesheaf. This is the day that they were allowed to eat the grain of the land. But we need to remember, there was something that they had to do first before they were allowed to eat the grain of the land. What was it? I believe I've already mentioned it. But I'm going to read again Joshua 5:11 because it is so important. And they did eat of the old corn of the land on the morrow after the Passover, unleavened cakes and parched corn in the self-same day. And again, we still need to confirm if the morrow after the Passover is indeed the morrow after the weekly Sabbath. And the questions are both of these morrows on Abib 15? Moshe's instructions for the Wavesheaf, let's look at them. Leviticus 23:10. This is very specific. Speak to the children of Israel, and you shall come into the land. You shall say to them, when you come into the land, very, very specific, when you come into the land, and this will be through the leadership of Joshua, that land which I give you, that's Canaan, and shall reap its harvest. Then you shall bring a sheaf of the firstfruits of your harvest to the priest. The sheaf of the firstfruits. Numbers 15:18-19. What does it say? When ye come into the land whither I bring you, then it shall be that, note these words, when ye eat of the bread of the land, when ye eat of the grain that has been restricted up to this point, when you eat of the bread of the land, ye shall offer up an heave offering, or a wavesheaf, unto Yahuwah. These two verses, along with Joshua 5:11, are super, super specific. The wavesheaf will be celebrated in Canaan. This next verse in Leviticus 23:11 is a prophecy of what will happen. It's a prophecy.
It's a really interesting prophecy, and we're going to get into the thick of the study now. So just pay attention as carefully as you can. In Leviticus 23:11, it says, and he shall wave the sheaf before Yahuwah for your acceptance. On the morrow after the Shabbat, the priest waves it. Lots of repetition here because we want you to see how these all these witnesses connect up. A morrow after the Shabbat, this is a question. What type of Shabbat is this verse referring to? Is this verse referring to the weekly Shabbat, or is it actually referring to the feast of the first feast of the unleavened bread, the first Shabbat of unleavened bread? So let's see if we can put this onto a chart and see what we come up with. We're asking the question, which morrow is it? In other words, everyone, is the wavesheaf established on the morrow after the weekly Sabbath? Is the wavesheaf established there? Or is the wavesheaf established on the morrow after the unleavened bread Sabbath? Okay, so either one or the other. We've got to figure this out. Which morrow is it talking about? And don't forget that we're still assuming that Passover is on that 7th day Shabbat, that weekly Shabbat. Shabbat, according to Moses, we will read Leviticus 23:11 again. We're going to look closer at the Shabbat, and he shall wave the sheaf before Yahuwah for your acceptance on the morrow after the Shabbat. Now, I know we can't always take a lot of stock into the Hebrews word numbers, but we are going to do that in this particular study. This is a 7676 Shabbat. This is the Shabbat that the priest is waving it. And if you look into the definitions, Shabbat, intensive from 76, 73, and intermission, specifically, what does it say? The Sabbath. It doesn't say a Sabbath, it says the Sabbath, every Sabbath. So 7676 is specific, noting that the Leviticus 23:11 Shabbat is the weekly Sabbath as designated by that 7676 right there. However, that is going to raise another question for a lot of people. And some of them believe that the first day of unleavened bread is also Shabbat. But the question is, are the feast Sabbaths connected to the Hebrew number 7676? That's what we want to find out, because I was kind of taught something different than what we found in this study. Well, you know what? The answer is no and yes. We have a no-yes answer here. We want to do a comparison of 7677 to the 7676. 7677 is Shabbaton. It is from 7676, a Sabbatism, and it is a special holiday. That's what it says for 7677. And some examples of this 7677 feast Sabbaths are, you will find it, the first day of the Feast of Trumpets in Leviticus 23:24 are noted as a 7677 Shabbat. The first and the 8th days of the Feast of Tabernacles in Leviticus 23:39 are also noted as 7677. But there is one feast Sabbath that is a 7676, and that is the Day of Atonement. In fact, this is the most Kodesh, solemn Shabbat of the year. So yes, the only feast Sabbath connected to 7676 is Yom Kippur or Day of Atonement. That's really important to remember. But the question is, are the unleavened breads Shabbats connected to which one? Is it 7676 or 7677? Which one are the unleavened bread Shabbats connected to? Remember, Leviticus 23:5 says, in the 14th day of the first month at even is Yahuwah's Passover. And then verse 6, it says, on the 15th day of the same month is the feast, 28:22, a feast of unleavened bread. 7 days you must eat unleavened bread. Verse 7 says, in the first day ye shall have a Kodesh convocation. Kodesh 69:44, convocation 47:44, and it says you shall do no servile work. So the festival Shabbats of the first and 7th days of unleavened bread don't seem to be connecting with these two numbers, 7676 or 7677. Something very interesting to consider. But it does say that the unleavened bread Shabbats are listed as very Kodesh convocations. So they are important. They're just not listed with the same number as the Day of Atonement or even the fall feasts. So there is some important Hebrew definitions, and Tim will take us through these because I want you to have an idea of what's going on with them.
So let's look at the word feast, unleavened bread. It's H2282. Now, please allow me to have a drink and wet my whistle. Why did I do that? Because I want to pronounce this word properly. That letter is, the first letter is a chet, and we need to use our throat to pronounce it. So I'm going to try this again, and the word is chag. And it's very important that we understand that letter because it makes a difference between several very important Hebrew words. So that word feast comes from the word chag. It's a festival. It's a solemn feast day. So the word holy, as Charlene had mentioned earlier, is H6944 Kodesh. And it's from H6942. It's a sacred place. It's a consecrated thing, a dedicated thing, or a hallowed thing. Now, some of those words I don't appreciate too much, hallowed being one of them, but that is what we see in the Strongs. So that just so we understand what it is. How about the word convocation? It's from H4744, mikra. It is a public meeting. Now look at this, rehearsal. What are these feasts for us? Are they not rehearsals so that we can accomplish what needs to be done through our lives, a practice for the future? And the word assembly is also used there. We need to gather in assembly for these feasts.
Okay, so we have given you a lot of different numbers to look at. This 7676, which links to the weekly Sabbath, and the 7677 that links to the feast Shabbats in the fall. And then, of course, we have these other three numbers that we just talked about that are linking to numbers in the spring festivals. So these Hebrew numbers are all linked to worship statutes, whether they would be weekly or annual Shabbats. But I want you to note that the phrases feast, there's your 2282, of unleavened bread, and holy convocation or Kodesh convocation, these three numbers, do you know what? They are never, ever listed as a weekly Shabbat along with the number 7676. And they're never listed as an annual feast Sabbath along with the number 7677. Now, there's a very good reason for this. And I just appreciate so much that there was a difference made here, because it just makes the work a whole lot easier to understand what's going on. These Hebrew definitions confirm the Wavesheaf placement very, very nicely. Number one, Wavesheaf does not follow the holy convocation of the first unleavened bread Shabbat of Abib 15. Okay, never does it do that. Number two, in the year that Joshua crossed the Jordan, the Wavesheaf follows only the weekly Shabbat, which is 7676. And in this study, we're saying that was on Abib 14, that Shabbat, with the placement of Abib 15 coming directly after that. The Wavesheaf does not follow the Hebrew word numbers of 2282, 6944, or even 4744. Now, I just want you to take note, because the next slide is likely the most important slide of the whole presentation. It's going to attempt to demonstrate two covenant statutes of what happens on every Passover festival on, number one, on the day after Passover, and another one, number two, on the day after the weekly Shabbat inside the Passover week. And the question is, will Joshua have something to say about these special statutes? Not seen this anywhere else, only Joshua has this. So we've got the chart into three parts here. I'll just try to go slow so you can follow. I'm calling this two covenant calendar statutes. We're going to see what happens the day after Abib 14 Passover in the first instance, and what happens with the day after, the seventh day Sabbath, whether the Sabbath is after Passover or on the Passover, whether they both share the same date. Going back up to number one, Leviticus 23:6, and on the 15th day of the same month is the feast of unleavened bread unto Yahuwah. Very clear. On Abib 15, the unleavened bread Shabbat always follows Abib 14th Passover. That's easy to understand, okay? That's the first scenario. That's the first statute. Statute number two, We're looking at what happens at the day after the Sabbath, no matter where the Sabbath is. It says in Leviticus 23:11, and he shall wave the sheaf before Yahuwah on your acceptance on the morrow after the 7-6-7-6 weekly Shabbat. That's when the priest waves it. So if Passover is on a Shabbat, the day after the Shabbat is always the wave sheaf, plain and simple. That's just the way it is. Wave sheaf always follows after the seventh day Shabbat within the Passover festival. Now, what we're going to do next is put these two covenants together and see what we have, because Joshua 5:11 fulfills both of these calendar statutes in absolute perfection. Joshua 5:11 is the verse that you need to understand. And they did eat of the old corn of the land on the morrow after the Passover, unleavened cakes and parched corn on the selfsame days. The morrow after the Passover, we're talking about two morrows. There's actually two morrows involved here. The first morrow is the first cycle of the week, which is the wave sheaf ceremony. And as we've already noted, that the wave sheaf in Joshua is following right after the weekly Shabbat. But there is another morrow. It is the Abib 15, and they're both landing on the same day. We all know that Abib 15 always follows after Abib 14. So we're talking about two different morrows here that are falling on the same day when you're looking at wave sheaf and you're looking at Abib 15. This is where we're saying that Abib 14 Passover in the Joshua account is on the seventh day weekly Sabbath. Just like you to ponder that for a little bit. We just will do a little tiny review here about the wave sheaf and how it follows the 7-6-7-6 weekly Shabbat. This is chart number 6 out of 7. We're going to be talking about Passover, wave sheaf, and unleavened bread. In box 21, remember the children kept the Passover here on the 14th day of the month at even in the plains of Jericho. This was the weekly Sabbath. Passover was on the same day of the week as the weekly Sabbath. And you all remember that it was at the night that they were commanded. They were commanded to eat the Passover lamb that night, and any remains that were left over had to be burned before the morning with fire. Right there, everybody knows that that is your cycle exchange that now takes you into Abib 15. Abib 15, according to Joshua, is going to house the wave sheaf festival and the first Sabbath of unleavened bread. You have Joshua 5:11 there for a review, but this day, Abib 15, was a very special day. It housed the wave sheaf festival and the first Shabbat of unleavened bread for the Passover festival that year. So the wave sheaf is on Abib 15, and it is following the Passover within the Passover week. Well, friends, finally, we are able to confirm that Passover is on the Shabbat. Very special day. Joshua has it written down so clearly. There's no way you can adjust this. It doesn't have to be adjusted to having Passover on the day before, on the preparation day, or even on the day after. It's definitely on the weekly Sabbath. We've confirmed everything now. Everything is falling into place very, very nicely. We've learned that the wave sheaf right here, the wave sheaf is the morrow after the Passover. The wave sheaf is the morrow after the Passover, and it's also the morrow after the weekly Sabbath. It is not going to be placed on the morrow after the unleavened bread Sabbath. Okay, it's the wave sheaf is after the weekly Shabbat. So the wave sheaf can only be waved on the day after the weekly Shabbat, the 7-6-7-6. Well, it looks like we have a review slide here, Tim.
Yes, and before we have the review, I'd like to ask a question. Yahusha said, "It has been accomplished." What was it he accomplished? Is his example different than what Joshua's example is? Did you, and there was more specific question, when Yahusha's first ascension after his resurrection, did it happen on a Friday morning, after the unleavened bread Shabbat? Or was his first ascension after the seventh day Sabbath in the Boker, in the morning of the first day of the week, the first day after the seventh day Sabbath? What was his example? Was it the same as what we've read in Joshua, or was it different? And that's something that you need to examine for your own self. It's just a question I have to cause you to think. What was Yahusha's example? Because ultimately, he has the final say. So moving on here, Joshua confirms we must pay attention to which Sabbath days are understood as H7676 Shabbat and H7677 Shabbaton. We need to understand the differences. And Wavesheaf always follows only the H7676 Shabbat within the Passover festal week. At least we understand that that is the example that Yahusha gave to us. And unleavened bread always follows Abib 14 Passover.
Well, we're just going to carry on this review a little bit. This is from number 5. Like we said, Wavesheaf never follows days linked to the Hebrew. Do you know what's going to come up? Never follows days linked to the Hebrew numbers 2822 that use feast in the King James Bible, 6944 that uses the word holy or Kodesh, and 4744 that uses the words convocation. Wavesheaf does not follow any of these words or numbers, and it doesn't even come close. Even if it looks like it, everybody, even if it looks like it, Wavesheaf is only connected to the weekly Shabbat. Now, here's just a little calendar chart, and this is only a sample calendar, but it is not for Joshua chapter 5. I just want to show you that sometimes Passover is on a Friday because the Passover date can move all through the weekdays, okay? When you have Passover on a 6th cycle of Friday, yes, you will have unleavened bread Shabbat on a weekly Shabbat. You will have your 7676, that's your weekly Shabbat, and your 2282 is designated as linking to the unleavened bread Shabbat. And then you will have the 16th follow after that, Abib 16, quite naturally, and Wavesheaf will be on Abib 16 in a case like that. There in Leviticus 23:11 are the instructions for what I'm talking about, but I just wanted you to really take note here that this will happen. You will have Wavesheaf on an Abib 16. It does happen, but everybody, it is following the Shabbat, the weekly Shabbat. It doesn't follow the rule of following the unleavened bread Shabbat. That is something that you need to just keep in mind. 5b, we're doing a little bit more of a review here. Covenant calendar fact is this: if and when the Wavesheaf follows the first Sabbath of unleavened bread on Abib 16, because that does happen, that's going to happen when you have a Passover that falls on a Friday, okay? You're going to have your unleavened bread Shabbat follow your 14th on a Sabbath, okay? They will both be on the same day, and it doesn't happen every single year. But the thing is that I want you to remember that the Wavesheaf on Abib 16 over here is actually following. It actually follows the Shabbat, the weekly Shabbat. It is not married to and linked to the unleavened bread, okay? Now, what I'm saying is that you will see that happen about once every 6 or 7 years. It doesn't happen every year, but it does happen. But just because it happens once every 6 or 7 years does not mean it's a rule that you can follow, that you can hang everything on. Just keeping this chart here for you to look at and just to remember. So far, I want to say that a lot of emphasis has been placed on the Hebrew numbers to prove that the wave sheaf follows the weekly Shabbat within the Passover festival. We have used a lot of numbers, and Hebrew scholars have generated these Hebrew numbers, so there could be some mistakes. But while they can serve to show the truth of the matter, there also needs to be a second witness for proof, and that's going to be established with the placement of Pentecost. Tim, will you give us a review for this section?
Number 6, Joshua confirms the wave sheaf. He confirms it on Abib 15, which is after the Passover. He confirms that it follows the H7676 weekly Shabbat, and therefore Passover was celebrated on the weekly Shabbat. But let's look at number 6. Enoch has every Passover celebration on the third cycle of the week, everyone without exception. That is their command for the Enoch calendar. That is simply not seen in the scripture. In the scripture, there is what is seen as the Passover on various different days throughout the week. So there is a serious alignment problem with the Enoch calendar and the scripture. It is a non-alignment problem.
Causes a lot of problems. Okay, let's just take a little look here what happens with lunar Sabbaths, with the lunar calendar. Number 7 review, Joshua confirms that the weekly Sabbath was on Abib 14. There's no question about that at all anymore, but we want to take a little bunny trail, because remember we showed you some lunar Sabbaths falling on the 8th, the 15th, and the 22nd, 29th. No, I don't think we showed you that. We showed you an Enoch, but those that keep the lunar Sabbaths, they will say that those Sabbaths are always on the 8th day of the month, the 15th, the 22nd, and the 29th. And that is according to the phases of the moon, whether they're citing conjunctions, a dark moon, or if they're citing a sliver moon or a full moon. It doesn't matter. Those are still the dates, okay? But you know what? Joshua does not allow weekly lunar Sabbaths to have any recognition on Yahuwah's covenant calendar, because in this study, he shows you very clearly that Abib 14 Passover landed on the Shabbat, the weekly Shabbat. Abib 14 Passover does not land on the 15th day of the month. So that could be taken to a fuller study, but just to let you know, there is a problem there with the lunar Sabbath calendars. So finally, everyone, wave sheaf is understood. Tim, will you take us through this slide?
This discovery also eliminates 2 other teachings. They're false teachings. That's why they're eliminated. The false teaching that wave sheaf must always be celebrated on Abib 16. That has been removed by Joshua in the documentation in the scripture. The false teaching that wave sheaf must always follow a feast Sabbath, specifically the first Sabbath of unleavened bread. Well, Joshua sets the record straight with his documentation. Joshua has confirmed that the wave sheaf must follow the weekly Shabbat during the Passover week. That's a must follow the weekly Shabbat. That is his example. And that is the example that ultimately Yahusha set when he said it has been accomplished. He accomplished that through his death. So please do note, scripture records 3 Passovers that are easy to calculate for Moshe, Joshua, and Yahusha. Next, these Passovers, or the Passovers and wave sheaf, will be illustrated on 2 different sets of charts.
And don't forget, we said the easy ones. We have found many Passovers in the scripture, but these are the easy ones. But the first thing that we need to remember is this, that the Passover days of the week are flexible. The Passover days. Wave sheaf dates of the month are flexible. So these are different. A day is different than a date. We want to look at Passovers on any day of the week, any cycle of the week. And I just want to show you what happens here, because Passover can land on the first, second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, or seventh cycle. It can be on any day of the week. But the Wavesheaf is on the first cycle of the week, but that can be a different date. It could be the 21st, it could be Abib 20th, Abib 19, Abib 18, 17, 16, or 15. So let's just go through this. We'll look at the 3 easy examples. When Moses had the Exodus from Egypt, that Passover was on a 3rd cycle or a Tuesday. And although they didn't celebrate Wavesheaf at that point in time, because the instructions were they were not going to celebrate Wavesheaf until they came into the land. But definitely there was a Wavesheaf because you had a Pentecost count. And in that year, the Wavesheaf would have been on Abib 19. That would have been the date, okay? Passover is always on the 14th. But that year, when you get to the first cycle of the week, it would have been the date of Abib 19. When we look at Yahusha's Passover in the midst of the week, the 14th, his Wavesheaf would have been on the first cycle, but now the date is different. It's Abib 18. And there's one more. It's Joshua, the one that we're studying. Joshua had his Passover that year on the 7th day weekly Sabbath, okay? But the first cycle of the week was Abib 15. So you can see that the Wavesheaf dates will change. They are flexible. For Passover, the day is flexible. Okay, that's kind of important. Let's look at one more slide that might demonstrate this a little bit easier. In each case below, the day of Wavesheaf and the beginning of the Omer count falls within the days of unleavened bread. So if you have Passover right here, okay, and then you have your unleavened bread days following after that, you have 7 of them. This is just your heading here of what happens. You have your Passover and your 7 days of unleavened bread. If your Passover lands on the first cycle of the week on the 14th, your Wavesheaf will be all the way over here at the end of the chart, following the weekly Sabbath. Okay, your Wavesheaf will be right there and it will be on the 7th unleavened bread day. Okay, the 2nd unleavened bread Sabbath. If Passover falls on a Monday, you go all the way to the Sabbath and then you have your Wavesheaf. That would be your 6th day of unleavened bread. If your Passover is on a Tuesday, the 3rd cycle, the 14th, all you do is go all the way to the weekly Shabbat, and then the Wavesheaf follows. And it just follows that way all the way down. When we get to Joshua, we already know that his Passover was on the weekly Shabbat, and the Wavesheaf is the day after. It's on the first cycle of the week. So you can see that Joshua follows these Torah instructions to the letter. It's always the same. And what we're looking for is if Yahusha does the same thing in the Gospels. So just a little review here, because this is a little confusing to some people, that a date and or a day are usually not the same. And this is just a little random example for you to look at. On this calendar, the 15th date of the first month is not always on the 4th cycle of the week. You can see here it's landing on the 4th cycle or Wednesday or the midst of the week. This doesn't happen every single month or every single year for the Passover festivals. Likewise, Abib 14 is not always going to be on a Tuesday, like Enoch declares, and it's not always going to be on a Wednesday, like Yahusha's Passover. So these dates and days, they fluctuate. So let's examine Abib 14 for 3 different years and see what happens. I'm leaving up this chart that we had a couple slides ago so that you can see that when Abib 14 Passover lands on any of these days of the week, it will have a different date of the month. So let's just compare, first of all, to Moses' Passover, when he was taking the children out of the land of Egypt. That particular year, Passover was on a third cycle. Okay. He had 3 days to travel. They crossed over the Red Sea, and Shabbat is right here on the 18th day of the month. Wavesheaf would have been the very next day if they were commanded to celebrate it. Okay. That's when Passover is on a third cycle. Let's look at Yahushua's Passover, because his Passover was on the midst of the week. There's the midst of the week, and we know he was 3 days and 3 nights resting. Right there is your weekly Sabbath on the 17th. Wavesheaf in this particular year is on Abib 18. It's not Abib 19, it's Abib 18. Let's just do a comparison with Joshua's Passover year. His Passover that year, or Yahushua's Passover, was on the 14th day of the month, landing on a weekly Sabbath, and the very next day is Wavesheaf. That was the year of Joshua. So you always pick the very next day, even if Passover is on the weekly Sabbath. Well, Tim, we have another review slide.
Number 9, Joshua confirms covenant calendar's wavesheaf is in direct opposition to Enoch's wavesheaf placement. That is direct opposition. Why? Enoch's wavesheaf is always on Abib 26, outside of the week of the Passover festival. And that does not agree with Joshua nor Yahushua's example. Make that very, very clear. The 26th is outside of the unleavened bread festival, and that does not agree with the scriptures. Here is a take on the Enoch Zadok first fruit festival. The Sabbath dates for Enoch's first month are the 4th, the 11th, the 18th, and the 25th. So look at the square, the red box there, the 26th of the first month. That is their declaration for the first fruits, or the wave of the sheaf offering. That is not within the Feast of Unleavened Bread, and it is not scriptural. It does not align. Enoch's first fruit is outside of the Passover Spring Festival. What does that do to the Enoch calendar and scriptural alignment? That is for you to decide.
And there's something else. If there's one thing wrong in another calendar, it's a counterfeit automatically. It doesn't have to have 3 strikes against it. But anyway, poor Enoch. Joshua's witness is easy to understand if you really look at it carefully. The observation is, though, that many that honor Yahuwah's festivals suggest that the wavesheaf must always be celebrated on Abib 16 or be married to Abib 16, and that it must follow the first Shabbat of unleavened bread. You know what, friends? This is simply not true. As shown through Joshua's testimony, he has sealed it up tight. This information from Joshua chapter 5, especially verses 10 and 11, clearly eliminates these 2 false teachings. In fact, it is impossible for wavesheaf to be placed on Abib 16 in this account with Joshua. It's not even possible. However, this is not to say that wavesheaf can never be on Abib 16. It is to say that wavesheaf is not always placed on Abib 16. The scriptural support of wavesheaf is of most importance, and we've already discovered part of the reason why, but we'll see more in part 2. And besides Joshua, don't forget that there is support found in Leviticus 23, Exodus 12, 16, and 19 study, and the gospel account. But you know what? All of this information just might raise another question, another really important question. But first, let's do a review.
Joshua confirms once again the wavesheaf can be celebrated on Abib 16, and that is if Passover falls on the 6th cycle. So we look on there on the first day of the week, you see the 16th is wavesheaf, but we must have a Passover on the 6th cycle, or a Friday in common terms. That's the prerequisite. Then Shabbat is Abib 15, with the first Shabbat of unleavened bread. Wavesheaf follows on Abib 16 on this scenario that we see in front of you. About once every 6 to 7 years, Wavesheaf and first unleavened bread Shabbat share the same date. They see on the left, there is the 15th, Wavesheaf and unleavened bread. And that is what Joshua's example is. There is a question that should be pondered when Wavesheaf and first Shabbat of unleavened bread share the same date of Abib 15.
I wonder if you know what that question is. Every feast and festival is of utmost importance, whether it's an annual Shabbat or not. In Joshua's account, 2 festivals do share the date of Abib 15. It's the first Sabbath of unleavened bread, and of course, the Wavesheaf festival. But here's the questions, everyone. The really important question: which festival secures first place? Is it going to be the Wavesheaf, or is it going to be the unleavened bread festival? And will Joshua give priority to one of them? Will Joshua make the right choice? And then, does it really matter? Well, we're going to find out about that in part 2 of Joshua's Wavesheaf. I'd like to just mention that with the Wavesheaf and the first Shabbat of unleavened bread, both on Abib 15, we have to find out which one is going to take priority. Which feast will be the backbone of our salvation? If you're wondering about that, because it's a really important question, we invite you to come and see. Well, friends, that is the end of part 1 out of 3 parts. If you have any questions or comments, you can certainly send them to Tim or myself at questions@studythecalendar.com, and we would be happy to help you to understand further, to answer your questions. And that's all for today in part 1. Thank you for being with us, and shalom.